Hi everyone, welcome to our channel NCERT Science. So this video is a continuation of the NCERT Science Class 9 series, and today we will be talking about Chapter 7 in NCERT for Class 9, that is Diversity in Living Organisms. Now this is a biology chapter, and before we start the lesson, I wanted to do my standard speech on it. So I want to mention three things. The first one is that this video will be helpful to those preparing for CBSE exams, NTSE and NEET. The second thing is that I encourage you to take your own notes. So as I said before, I will be presenting in my own words. I've taken pictures from the NCERT textbook that I found online, and I highly recommend you to take your own notes because that will help you remember better. Alright? Write everything you understand in your words so that when you sit in the exam, you will be able to remember better. And the third thing is that I intend to make these videos very short, less than an hour and a half long, because I want this to be a video that you can watch a day before your exam, or just for a brush up, not for I'm not going to cover every concept in detail. I'm going to go over the whole lesson. I am going to cover important topics, and I will keep telling you what questions you can expect. Alright, so if you feel I'm going a little fast, I advise you to change your YouTube settings to 0.75 speed. Alright, so with that said, let's jump right in and start with Chapter 7 in NCERT Science, Diversity in Living Organisms. Alright, so this is, as I said in the previous video, this is an interesting chapter. You have a lot to memorize and learn in this chapter. So the best thing to do would be take continuous notes. You need to be an active learner. Don't just sit there and listen like you're listening to a story. This is not a story, this is your lesson, so you have to take notes. Alright, so all this is introduction. All this is introduction. We have an activity here. Alright, this is not an activity, but this is just a fun way to start the lesson. Alright, so there are a few questions that will help you. This is like this warm-up activity before you start the lesson. Alright, so we have two questions here. These are not related to these are not related to the lesson, so I want you to try them out. These are like in general questions. Alright, so the first topic that we're going to start with is, what is the basis of classification? So attempts have been made at classifying living things into groups. There have been many ways of classifying them. Alright, so there was a Greek philosopher and a Greek thinker named Aristotle who classified animals according to whether they lived on land, in water, or in the air. Alright, so this was like the primary basic way of looking at it, but there were many exceptions in that model, and there were many questions that contradicted that model. Alright, so for a model to be perfect, you need to have as less exceptions as possible, but in Aristotle's model there were many exceptions, so this wasn't considered a very good model in the later years. Alright, so animals that live in the sea include corals, whales, octopuses, starfish, and sharks. We can see that they're very different from each other. So octopuses and starfish, whales and starfish, the size of a whale compared to that of a starfish, that's very different, right? And the properties I can say of starfish, it's small, it's not very violent, but for sharks, the first thing that pops into our mind is the violent teeth and how scary it is and all of that, right? So they're very different. Although they live in the same habitat, water, they're very different from each other, and this is a very misleading way of classifying organisms. So that's why it was rejected. So habitat is the only point that they share in common, all these animals, right? This is not an appropriate way of making groups of organisms to study and think about. That is why we need to decide on which basis we will classify organisms, right? We have to pick the next set of characteristics for making subgroups within this division. So we pick the broadest division, and then we keep subdividing it based on more detailed characteristics. All right. The process of classification within which each group can then continue to use new characteristics each time, that will be the best way. All right. So we need to think about what is meant by characteristics. All right. So characteristics are the details of appearance or behavior. They're the form and function of organisms. All right. So that is what we mean by characteristics. A form and function, if we take the same example of a starfish and a shark. Starfish, the form of a starfish is very small. Sharks are huge. If you take function, starfish is not violent. It doesn't prey on smaller fish or something like that. But sharks prey on smaller fish. They eat, sometimes they eat humans, other animals that are found in the water. They're very carnivorous, but starfish not so much, right? That is how starfish and sharks differ by their characteristics, by their form and function. This is why Aristotle's classification model was considered to be inappropriate. So a characteristic is a particular feature or a particular function. Alright, it's a particular feature or a particular function. So one characteristics of humans is that they have two hands, typically 2 hands, 5 fingers on each hand, 2 legs, 5 toes on each leg. Those are the characteristics of humans. That's how typically humans are, right? 2 hands, 5 fingers for each hand. They have 1 nose, they have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth. That is a typical characteristic of humans, right? So we can run. So humans can run, but the banyan tree cannot. So that is also a characteristic. That is what locomotion is, a characteristic that separates plants from animals. For example, right? A monkey can run, a human can run, a rabbit can run, but a tree can't. So all the rabbit, the monkey, and humans, they're all animals, but the tree is a plant. That's how we divided plants and animals. To understand how some characteristics are decided as being more fundamental, let us consider how a stone wall is built, alright? So the stones have different shapes and sizes, and the stones in the top of the wall would not influence the choice of stones that come below them, right? So shapes and sizes of stones in the lowermost layer will decide the shape and size of the next layer, right? If it's like a bottom-up approach that we're taking, alright? The stones in the lowermost layer are the characteristics that decide the broadest divisions among living organisms, and they are independent of any other characteristics, alright? So locomotion is one stage of division. Whether they locomotion, whether they move or they don't move. Alright, so let me write here. Locomotion can be divided based on whether they move or they don't move, right? If they don't move, they're considered plants. This is on a basic level, right? This is not completely true, but this is basic to make sure you understand. This is what I'm using. And if they do move, how do they move? Do they move on 4 limbs or 2 limbs? Right? So if they move on 4 limbs, we're most likely to think that they're some kind of animals like monkeys or rabbits or tigers. But if they move on 2 limbs, we're more likely to think, oh, they're humans, because humans walk on 2 legs, right? This is like a typical basic flow chart that I did. It's not completely true, but to make sure you have an idea. Alright, so what was on top, locomotion, was independent of whether they move on 4 limbs or 2 limbs, or whether they move or not. It's just a bit, that's the broadest division, right? But whether they move on 2 legs or 4 legs, that is dependent on the broadest level, which is locomotion. That is what they mean by this paragraph here. Alright, so we look at many interrelated characteristics. Sorry about that. Okay, we look at many interrelated characteristics starting from the nature of the cell in order to classify all living organisms. So what are some concrete examples of such characteristics? A eukaryotic cell has membrane-bound organelles, including a nucleus, which allows cellular processes to be carried out efficiently in isolation from each other. That's what we learned in the previous lessons, right? Eukaryotic cell has a well-defined nucleus and it has membrane-bound organelles. So eukaryotic organisms can be differentiated from eukaryotic cells can be differentiated from prokaryotic cells based on how their nucleus is and based on whether their organelles are membrane bound or not, right? That is one characteristic that separates eukaryotic cells from prokaryotic cells. How well defined is the nucleus? That is one characteristic. That's number 1. Number 2 is how are the organelles, whether they're membrane bound or not. That is what differentiates prokaryotic cells from eukaryotic cells, right? So these are 2 questions that are considered when you're differentiating between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Similarly, at each level of identification, you have different questions, alright? So then the next point would be, do the cells occur singly or are they grouped together, and do they live as an indivisible group? So that is what differentiates between unicellular and multicellular organisms. So this was between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. This is between unicellular and multicellular organisms, right? Okay, so do organisms produce their own food through the process of photosynthesis? So this is how to differentiate between photosynthetic, those that can perform photosynthesis, versus non-photosynthetic organisms. Photosynthetic organisms, alright? And then of the organisms that produce photosynthesis, which happen to be plants, what is the level of organization in their body? Are they simple versus complex plants? Alright, simple. So that question differentiates between simple and complex plants, right? And of the animals which are non-photosynthetic, how does the individual's body develop and organize its different parts, and what are specialized organs found for different functions, right? That is what differentiates between simple and complex animals. So these are questions that vary based on what level of organization we're talking about. So even in these few questions that we've asked, a hierarchy is developing. So first we move from the most basic prokaryotic eukaryotic cells, and then we moved on to unicellular versus multicellular, and then we moved on to plants versus animals. And in plants and animals, we try to differentiate between simple versus complex plants and simple versus complex animals. So that is hierarchy. They're like steps that are one below each other, and each step leads you closer to what you want to achieve, right? You want to achieve a complete classification of organisms. Each step, each subdivision is bringing you closer to that classification. That's how you can think of it. So you have 3 questions here. All 3 of them are based on the lesson that we did. So if you are not able to answer them, feel free to go back and watch the video, that part of the video where I explained it. Alright, so we move on to the second topic, classification and evolution. So all living things are identified and categorized based on their body design in form and function. So whether we're differentiating between a starfish and a shark, that we're dividing them based on their form and their function. So some characteristics are likely to make more wide-ranging changes in the body design than others, right? So there is a role of, so time also plays a role in this. Alright, so once a certain body design comes into existence, it will shape the efforts of all other subsequent design changes simply because it already exists. In other words, characteristics that come into existence earlier are likely to be more basic than characteristics that have come to existence later. If you take the example of evolution of humans, alright, so there is a theory, the scientific theory, that humans developed from apes, right? So the characteristics of apes are already present in us, but what made us human, our ability to speak, our ability to walk on two legs, our brain developed, right? So ability to think more. I'm not saying apes cannot think, they can think, but they think on a more basic level, right? So thinking on a basic level is already present in us, and what evolved us into humans is what developed from that, from the basic thinking stage, right? So characteristics that came into existence earlier, that would, in this case, what I'm talking about right now, that would be basic thinking capacity, like differentiating between what can be eaten, what is edible and what is not edible, right? That is the basic thinking capacity. And they're likely to be more basic than characteristics that have come into existence later. What came into existence later? Complex thinking capacity came in later, right? We're thinking about the quantum theory, we're thinking about I don't know, how the earth revolves around the sun. We were thinking about how to reach Mars from the earth. That is all complex thinking processes which apes didn't do, and even we didn't do until a few years ago, right? So that is how we're developing each, as we evolve, we're developing a few more characteristics. But the basic characteristics like basic thinking capacity, oh, can I eat this, can I not eat this, that is still there. No matter whether we're talking about how to reach Mars or how to reach Jupiter or how to leave the earth permanently, we will still be able to differentiate between what is edible and what is not edible. I cannot eat a pillow just because my thinking capacity has become complex. I have basic thinking capacity as well as complex thinking capacity. I can think, oh, this is a pillow, I'm supposed to sleep on it, I'm not supposed to eat it. I have food in the fridge that I'm supposed to eat, right? So basic capacity will be there. In addition to that, complex thinking capacity developed as organisms evolved. I just took the example of humans and apes because that is more relatable. But as other organisms evolved as well, that is what they went through. Basic characteristics were the foundation, and more complex characteristics built upon the basic characteristics. Alright, so Charles Darwin came up with The Origin of Species, that talks mainly about the evolution of different species. Alright, so we connect this idea of evolution to classification, and when we do that, we will find that some groups of organisms which have ancient body designs have not changed very much. We'll also find that other groups of organisms that acquired their particular body designs relatively recently. We'll find both of them. Alright, we'll find organisms with primitive body designs and novel body designs. Alright, so that is how we divide these organisms into primitive or lower organisms and advanced or higher organisms. Alright, so this is another block of information that you can read for general knowledge. So there is this concept here that can be tested, that is biodiversity. All right, biodiversity can be tested in your exams, and so try to be familiar. It's good to be familiar with this. And there's also these places that were tested. Mega diversity is also an important concept. When I was doing class 9 NCERT, when I was preparing for NTSE, we had a question that asked us to list some of these countries. So it's good to have them on your fingertips. And then we have 2 questions here. Again, I want you to solve these on your own, and if you have if you are unable to solve them, go back to the video where I explained that. Watch it, make sure you understand, solve the question, and then move on. All right. So now we start the hierarchy of classification. So Ernest Haeckel and Robert Whittaker and Carl Woese have tried to classify all living organisms into broad categories called kingdoms. So that was the first step, that was the first hierarchical stage, kingdoms. Alright, that's the broadest division. And there are 5 kingdoms: Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantain, Animalia. And the kingdoms division is very widely used. They're grouped based on their cell structure, mode of nutrition, source of nutrition, and body organization. So they're like the broadest characteristics that differentiate between the different organisms. All right. So the modification that Carl Woese introduced also divides Monera into Archaebacteria and Eubacteria, where Archaebacteria is ancient primitive bacteria and Eubacteria is newer, more advanced bacteria. Alright, so further classification is done. So the second stage would be phylum, kingdom, phylum, and then the third one would be class, fourth one order, fifth one family, sixth one genus, and seventh species. Alright, so kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Those are the 7 stages of classification. Alright, that's a P. Alright. Okay, so there are many ways to remember this. You can use a mnemonic. Whatever you can think of, you can Google saying mnemonic devices to remember the classification of organisms, and you'll have many mnemonics come up. You can remember it like that. Alright, so the 5 kingdoms that were given by Whittaker are Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantain, and Animalia. So first we'll talk about Monera. These organisms do not have a defined nucleus or organelles, nor do any of them show multicellular body designs. So what's the first thing that is supposed to come to your mind when you read this? It means that they're all prokaryotes. Alright, they have prokaryotic nuclei. They're prokaryotic cells. They don't have a well-defined nucleus. They don't have well-defined organelles. The meaning of no well-defined organelles is that they don't have membrane-bound organelles. Alright, and that is what is seen in prokaryotic cells. On the other hand, they show diversity based on many other characteristics. So these many other characteristics will help us differentiate among the Monera kingdom. Alright, so some of them have cell walls while some do not. So having or not having a cell wall has very different effects on body design here from having or not having a cell wall in multicellular organisms. So in multicellular organisms, having a cell wall would classify the organism into the plant's division but not having a cell wall would put it in the animal bucket. Let's say it's the plant bucket and the animal bucket. If the organism has a cell wall, it will be put into the plant bucket. If not, it will be put into the animal bucket. Alright, so that division is different from differentiating between organisms which have and do not have a cell wall in the prokaryotic cell note. Alright, so the mode of nutrition of organisms in this group can be either by synthesizing their own food or getting it from the environment. So the difference between autotrophic and heterotrophic, that is also one way of classifying between among Monera. Alright, so some examples would be bacteria, blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. That's one organism. They have two names. And mycoplasma. Alright, so this is Anabaena, this is bacteria, and they're all examples of the Monera kingdom. And then we have the kingdom Protista. This group includes many kinds of unicellular eukaryotic organisms. So Monera, I like to think of, I like to connect it to the previous concept. So Monera would be prokaryotic, unicellular. Protista would be eukaryotic, unicellular. Alright, that is the main difference between Monera and Protista. Monera is prokaryotic unicellular organisms and Protista is eukaryotic unicellular organisms. So eukaryotic means that it has a well-defined nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Alright, and some of these organisms use appendages like hair-like cilia or whip-like flagella for moving around. So these are additional, I like to think of them as accessories that help them move around. Alright, so how humans have legs, how animals have limbs, these organisms have cilia or flagella for moving around, and their mode of nutrition can also be either autotrophic or heterotrophic. Alright, so examples would be unicellular algae, diatoms, and protozoans. Alright, so unicellular algae, when you're giving the examples of Protista, it is important to write unicellular algae because there are other types of algae that are multicellular, but Protista, only unicellular eukaryotic organisms come under Protista. So when you're listing algae as an example, you should mention that you're talking about unicellular algae, not multicellular algae. Alright, so a few other examples would be Paramecium, amoeba, and euglena. So Paramecium have the cilia that you're talking about. So in the previous lesson I explained what cilia were. There's the thin hair-like structures that you see here all around. These are the cilia. And amoeba, you see its irregular shape. You're supposed to identify an amoeba by its irregular shape. And euglena has flagella. That's this whip-like, hair-like structure. Alright, that's the flagella of a euglena. And then we move on to the third kingdom, which is fungi. So they're heterotrophic eukaryotic organisms. If Monera was prokaryotic unicellular, Protista was eukaryotic unicellular, fungi is heterotrophic eukaryotic. Alright, and some of them use decaying organic material as food, and they're called saprotrophs. Okay, alright, so saprotrophs are organisms which use decaying organic material as food. Alright, that would be the definition of saprophytes. They use the protoplasm of a host organism for food, and they're called parasites. So organisms which use the protoplasm of a host organism for food are called parasites. Saprophytes are organisms that use decaying organic material as food, while parasites are organisms that use the protoplasm of a host organism for food. These are important definitions that you are supposed to remember. Alright, and many of them have the capacity to become multicellular organisms. So this is not at certain stages in their life. So this is not completely every single organism that is under fungi is not multicellular. That is why I did not say fungi are multicellular eukaryotic. I just stressed that they are heterotrophic eukaryotic, and most of them, not all of them, most of them have the ability to become multicellular organisms at some point in their lives. Alright, and they have cell walls made up of complex sugar called chitin. They a few of the examples are yeasts, molds, and mushrooms. So mushroom is a common example of fungi. So is yeast, and so is mold. So this will be a very easy kingdom to remember examples for. So I'm sorry about that. Alright, so some fungal species live in permanent mutually dependent relationships with blue-green algae, and such relationships are called symbiotic. So symbiotic relationships, that is also an important definition. Symbiotic relationships are those relationships in which two organisms depend on each other such that they are both mutually benefited. So in this scenario, a fungus and an algae, that was a very bad drawing, so I decided not to try. So fungus and algae stay together. One of them provides shelter while one of them provides food. Alright, so even in lichens, we have lichens all around, right? So one of those, or one of the organisms provides shelter to the other, while the other organism provides food to both of them. Alright, so that is how they're both mutually benefited. One gets shelter, one gets food. That is how it's called a symbiotic relationship. And now we're moving on to the fourth kingdom called Plantain. So these are all the plants, right? And they are multicellular eukaryotes with cell walls. Alright, again, Monera, prokaryotic unicellular organisms; Protista, eukaryotic unicellular organisms; fungi, heterotrophic eukaryotic organisms, most of which have the ability to become multicellular at some point in their lives. Plantain, multicellular eukaryotes with cell walls, and I'm going to go a little ahead of myself and say Animalia, multicellular eukaryotes without cell walls. Alright, so they're autotrophs, that is, they prepare their own food and they use chlorophyll for photosynthesis. Alright, all plants are included in this group, whether you want to talk about neem, mango, any flower plant, any ornamental crotons, anything, they're all part of Plantain. Alright, since plants and animals are most visible forms of the diversity, we will look at subgroups in this category. Alright, so once we're done with listing all 5 of them, we will have subgroups for Plantain and subgroups for Animalia. Alright, so Animalia, as I said before, are multicellular eukaryotic organisms without cell walls. So we don't have cell walls. That is what differentiates us from plants. They're heterotrophs. We don't prepare our own food, and preparing our own food doesn't mean standing in the kitchen and making yourself Maggie or whatever. Preparing your own food means from scratch. Alright, you're not making the corn that you're using for some other dish. You're just harvesting the corn from plants. And where did the corn come from for the plants? They prepared it by themselves. That is why they are called autotrophs and we are called heterotrophs, because we are consuming the corn that the plants made and we are making food. We are making it edible for us. That's it. We are not making our own food. Alright, so even for Animalia, we will look at their subgroups later. Alright, so this is a very important flowchart. Organisms can be divided into either prokaryotes or eukaryotes. For prokaryotes, there is only unicellular. Prokaryotes cannot exist as multicellular organisms, and that would be Monera. For eukaryotes, they can be either unicellular or multicellular. So unicellular are Protista, multicellular with cell wall, without cell wall. With cell wall, if they don't perform photosynthesis, they are fungi, and if they're able to perform photosynthesis, they are Plantain, and without cell wall, Animalia. Alright, so if you want to talk about Plantain, one way you can revise is you can say Plantain are multicellular organisms. They're multicellular eukaryotic organisms which have a cell wall, and they are able to prepare their own food through photosynthesis. Fungi are multicellular eukaryotes with cell wall which cannot perform photosynthesis. That is how you can do. So you're covering all the basis of classification. Alright, that is one way to revise this flowchart, and that is very important. And then we have 3 questions that I want you to try on your own. If you are unable to answer them, go back to the video to that part of the video where I explained it. Make sure you understand the concept, come back and answer it, and then let's move on. So Plantain is the first level of classification among plants, and it depends on whether the plant has well differentiated and distinct parts. Alright, so that is the first basis on how we're differentiating among plants. So the next level is based on whether the differentiated plant body has special tissues for the transportation of water and food or not. Alright, that would be the second level. And further classification looks at the ability to bear seeds. That's the third stage. And the fourth stage would be to see whether the seeds are enclosed within fruits or not. So the first one is Thalophyta. They do not have a well differentiated body. They're commonly algae. Alright, so Thalophyta mostly contains algae, and these plants are predominantly aquatic. Alright, so they have water as their natural habitat. So examples would be Spirogyra, Cladophora, and Chara. Those are the 3 organisms that I remember, and they're easy to remember, but by all means remember whatever is easier for you. So you might have had experience with other organisms, so you can go ahead and remember those because they'll be easy to recollect. And then we have Bryophyta. They are the amphibians of the plant kingdom. They're called the amphibians of plant kingdom. So if you go back and try to remember what the definition of amphibian is, an amphibian is that organism which can live in both water and on land. Alright, so by this we can see that Bryophyta are those plants which can live both in water and on land. The plant body is commonly differentiated to form stem and leaf-like structures. So Thalophyta did not have a well-differentiated body, but from Bryophyta to the rest of the plant kingdom, they have well-differentiated body. Alright, so there is no specialized tissue for the conduction of water. Although it has a well-differentiated body, it doesn't have a specialized tissue. Alright, so that would be the difference between Bryophyta and the rest of the plant kingdom. Alright, so some examples would be Funaria, that's moss, and Marcantia. Alright, so then we have the third phylum, which is Pteridophyta. In this group, the plant body is differentiated. That's what we saw, and that's what we said would occur from Bryophyta, a differentiated plant body. And it is differentiated into roots, stems, and leaves. And it has a specialized tissue for the conduction of water and other substances. Alright, so from Pteridophyta onwards, we have a well-differentiated body with a specialized tissue for conduction of water and other substances. Some examples are Marsilia, ferns, and horsetails. Alright, the reproductive organs of plants in all these 3 groups are very inconspicuous, so we can't see them very much, and they are therefore called cryptogams. Alright, cryptogams, those with hidden reproductive organs. Crypto means hidden, so cryptogams are those with hidden reproductive organs. That is one term that you're supposed to remember in Pteridophyta. Alright, on the other hand, plants with well-defined, well-differentiated reproductive parts that will ultimately make seeds are called phanerogams. Alright, so cryptogams versus phanerogams. Cryptogams are those with hidden reproductive organs, and phanerogams have visible reproductive organs. Alright, so seeds are the reproductive organs, and they are seen as a result of sexual reproduction process. Alright, they consist of the embryo along with stored food, which assists for the initial growth of the embryo during the germination. And what is they here? We're talking about seeds. Seeds have food that will be utilized by the seed during its initial stages of germination. Alright, so whether the seed is naked or whether it is enclosed in fruits is the next level of division. So Gymnosperms is the fourth phylum of the plant kingdom. It is derived from gymno, which means naked, and sperma, which means seed. Alright, so the plants of this group bear naked seeds. So Gymnosperm, naked seeds, and they're usually perennial. They occur throughout the year. They're evergreen, which is also because they occur throughout the year, and they're woody. Some examples are pines and deodar. Alright, that is Gymnosperms. Angiosperms, angio means covered, sperma again means seed. So they are also called flowering plants because they have covered seeds. And where are the seeds enclosed? In fruits. Alright, and how do fruits develop? From flowers. That is why they're called flowering plants. Alright, the seeds develop inside an ovary, which is modified to become a fruit. Alright, plant embryos in seeds have structures called cotyledons, and they are called seed leaves because in many instances they emerge and become green, and that is when the seed germinates. Alright, so cotyledons are like the primary leaves of the seed, which provide nourishment. Alright, and angiosperms are divided into two groups, and again, that is based on the number of cotyledons. If there's only one cotyledon, it is called a monocot, and if it has two cotyledons, they're called dicots. Alright, so we have examples for monocots and dicots. So this is the classification for plants. Alright, if they have differentiated plant parts, it is subdivided, but if they don't, it's Thalophyta. If it has vascular tissue, they are subdivided, but if it doesn't, it's Bryophyta. If they produce seeds, they're subdivided, but if they do not produce seeds, they're Pteridophyta. Alright, here I told you to remember the word cryptogam, right? Cryptogams. And if they bear, if the seeds are inside the fruits, they're subdivided, but if not, they're called gymnosperms. So organisms which bear, plants which bear seeds inside fruits are known as angiosperms, and whether they have two or one cotyledons divided into monocots and dicots respectively. Alright, that is the whole flow chart here. Alright, and we have three questions again that have been covered in this chapter. If you are not able to answer any of one of them, go back to that part of the video where we covered this. Alright, and now we're moving on to the Animalia kingdom. So this is the animal kingdom. So there are organisms which are, animals are eukaryotic, multicellular and heterotrophic organisms without cell walls. Alright, and most animals are mobile. That means they can move. They are further classified based on the extent and type of the body design differentiation that is found. So the first phylum in Animalia is Porifera. It means organisms with pores or holes. Alright, they are non-motile organisms that are attached to some solid support, so they do not move. There are holes or pores. That's why they're named Porifera. And these holes are present all over their body, and these lead to a canal system that helps in circulating water throughout the body and to bring in food and oxygen. So everything occurs through these holes. Alright, these animals are also covered with a hard layer of skeleton, and the body design involves very minimal differentiation and division into tissue. So the most how can I put it? The highest level, that was what I was looking for. The highest level of division is tissues. For humans, it is organ systems, but for Porifera, it is just tissues. Alright, so that is just one step ahead of cells. So it's multicellular, and all these cells divide into tissues and they stop at tissues. Alright, and they're mainly found in the water, and some examples are seen here: Cycon, Spongilia, and I can't read this, but whatever that is, I'm sorry, it wasn't clear. Alright, and then we have Coelenterata, which is also known as Cnidaria. The C is silent. It's called Cnidaria, but the C is supposed to be here. Just because you say Cnidaria, do not omit the C. That will make you lose points. Alright, Cnidaria with a C. That is one way to remember it. Cnidaria with the C, also known as Coelenterata. So these are animals. These are also animals that live in water. They show more body design differentiation. There is one cavity in the body, and the body is made up of two layers of cells. One makes up cells on the outside of the body, and the other makes up the inner lining of the body. So some of these species live in colonies. One example would be corals that you find in deep seas, while others are solitary, like hydra and jellyfish and sea anemone. Alright, so hydra, sea anemone, jellyfish, and corals, they are examples of Cnidaria. And then the third phylum would be Platyhelminthes, and the body of animals in this group is far more complexly designed than in the two other groups. So Platyhelminthes has a higher level of organization than Porifera and Cnidaria, but relative to animals, the other animals, the ones that come in next, this Platyhelminthes also has a primitive body design. Alright, it is bilaterally symmetrical. So bilaterally symmetrical means it can be divided only vertically to give two equal sides. Alright, so let's say I draw a rectangle like so. No, let me draw a trapezium. Right, so bilaterally symmetric means if I cut it vertically through the center, it gives me two symmetric no, I meant to do a different color, right? It gives me two symmetric sides. They're both symmetric. So this side is symmetric with this side. But if I had divided it like this, horizontally, they would not have been symmetrical. So a trapezium is bilaterally symmetrical. Similarly, platyhelminthes are bilaterally symmetrical. Alright. So and then we have, okay, so one important thing would be bilaterally symmetrical here. They meaning that the left and right halves of the body have the same design. So in the trapezium that I drew previously, the left side and the right side of that line, dividing line, had the same design. Alright, and there are three layers of cells. Alright, this is why they're also called triploblastic. Alright, this allows outside and inside body linings as well as some organs to be made. So the level of organization for platyhelminthes is organs. Alright, so for Porifera and Cnidaria, it was just tissues. For platyhelminthes, they're slowly moving on to organs. Alright, this allows outside and inside body linings as well as some organs to be made, and there is some degree of tissue formation, but there is no true body cavity or coelom. Coelom is body cavity in which they have developed organs. Alright, so they have organs, but they're not so developed that they can be present in a coelom or in a body cavity. Alright, so the body is flattened dorsoventrally. That means from top to bottom they're flat, which is why these animals are called flatworms. Alright, because they're dorsoventrally flattened. Platyhelminthes are also known as flatworms. That is, they are flat from top to bottom. Alright, they're either free living or parasitic. And some examples of free living platyhelminthes are liver flukes, planarians, and liver flukes are parasitic. Alright. Alright. So we have diagrams of them. This is Planaria, which is free living. Liver fluke is a parasite. Tapeworm is another example of platyhelminthes. And then we have the fourth phylum, which is Nematoda. So when I was studying, I used to get confused between Cnidaria and Nematoda, but how I later remembered it is that Cnidaria has a C and Coelenterata has a C. So Coelenterata is another word for Cnidaria, and that is the second phylum, but Nematoda is the fourth phylum, alright? So the nematode body is also bilaterally symmetrical and triploblastic. Triploblastic means it has three types of cells, alright, three layers of cells. However, the body is cylindrical rather than flattened, alright. So it is not dorso-ventrally flattened. For Nematoda, they are not dorso-ventrally flattened, they are cylindrical. There are tissues but no real organs. So it has a kind of sort of body cavity, alright. It's a pseudocoelom. Pseudocoelom means it has a false coelom or a false body cavity. Pseudo means false, alright. So Nematoda has a pseudocoelom. That is how you can remember it. And these are very familiar as parasitic worms causing those which cause diseases like elephantiasis, the filarial worms, or the worms in the intestines, roundworms or pinworms. They're all familiar, they're common disease-causing worms, alright? Those are nematodes. And then we have the fifth phylum, Annelida. They're also bilaterally symmetrical. That means they have the left and right side of their bodies have the same design, and they're also triploblastic. That means they have three layers of cells. But in addition to that, they have a true body cavity. So from Annelida onwards, we have a true body cavity or a true coelom, alright? So this allows well-defined organs to be packaged in the body structure. Thus, there is extensive organ differentiation. So from Annelida onwards, we have organs, true organs, alright? True organs from Annelida to the rest of the animal kingdom, alright? Differentiation occurs in a segmental fashion with the segments lined up one after another from the head to the tail. That is how differentiation occurs in Annelida. So centipedes, millipedes, earthworms, they're all Annelida because you can see them being differentiated. So if you take an earthworm, you see it having these differentiations, right? They're differentiated like so, like an earthworm is right here. I don't know why I was trying to kill you guys with my drawing skills, but so that's that, alright? So these animals are found in a variety of habitats, freshwater, marine water, as well as land. So they can be found in water and on land. Earthworms are found on land. So that is one way of remembering that Annelida can be found in water and land and on land. Earthworms and leeches are familiar examples. So leeches and earthworms, you might have heard leeches also. They are common examples of Annelida. Alright, but there's also Nereis, which is another common example for Annelida. And then the sixth phylum is Arthropoda, very famous phylum, the largest group of animals. Alright, these animals are bilaterally symmetrical. That is, their left and right sides of their bodies have a similar design, and they're segmented again. Alright, so their body is divided into a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. Alright, and they have an open circulatory system. This is important. They have an open circulatory system. So the blood does not flow in well-defined blood vessels. It just keeps flowing throughout the body. Alright, the coelomic activity, the coelomic cavity is blood-filled. There are no blood vessels that store the blood. It's flowing throughout the body, throughout the blood cavity or the coelom. They have jointed legs. So arthropod means jointed legs. So they have jointed legs. And some familiar examples are prawns, butterflies, houseflies, spiders, scorpions, crabs, our favorite mosquitoes, right? They're all arthropods. And then we have the seventh phylum in the animal kingdom, Mollusca. They're also bilaterally symmetrical. They also have so if I draw a dividing line through the center, they also have the left and right side of their bodies have similar design. Their coelomic cavity is reduced, so there's little segmentation, and they have an open circulatory system. Alright, so they don't have blood vessels to store the blood, and they have kidney-like organs for excretion. They don't have kidneys as such. They have kidney-like organs, so they have a little more well-defined organs that are used for excretion. They still don't have an organ system. They don't have an entire system in which they have kidneys and urinary bladder and a urethra. They don't have a full system for excretion. They just have one not so well-defined organ. Alright, it's kidney-like organ. It's not a kidney. It's something like that. Alright, and some examples are snails, mussels. There's the octopus, a unio. Alright, and this is I think they call the pila as the apple snail. I'm not sure, but it looks like an apple and it's a snail, so probably. Alright, and then the 8th phylum is Echinodermata. So echinos means hedgehog. So you remember, hedgehog, that spiny animal with those spiny things. That is what echinos means. Alright, and derma means skin, like the dermatologist that I was talking to you about, epidermis. Derma means skin, so they're spiny skinned organisms. Alright, Echinodermata have spiny skin. They are exclusively free living marine animals. They're not parasitic. Alright, they're triploblastic, that means they have 3 levels of cells, and they have a coelomic cavity. They have a true coelom. They also have a peculiar water-driven tube system that they use for moving around. Alright, so did you notice the word system here? That means they're beginning to have a small system for some function. So for moving around, they have a small water-driven system. Echinoderms have a small system for moving around. They have hard calcium carbonate structures that they use as a skeleton. So calcium carbonate structures that they use as a skeleton, they have such a skeleton that is made up of calcium carbonate, and you're supposed to tell me that the formula for calcium carbonate is CaCO3, because you were supposed to have that known in chemistry. Alright, that is how I want you to connect. When I say calcium carbonate, you're supposed to say, oh, CaCO3. That means you are familiar with chemistry. Alright, and examples of echinoderms are sea stars and sea urchins. Alright, and so there are a few diagrams here. And then we have the 9th phylum, the Protochordata, and these animals are also bilaterally symmetrical. They are triploblastic, and they have a coelom. So by now all these have become common characteristics. They are bilaterally symmetrical. They have their right and left sides of their bodies with the same design. They're triploblastic. They have 3 layers of cells, and they have a coelom. That is, they have a true body cavity. In addition to those 3 features, they now show a new feature of body design, namely called a notochord. Alright, notochord means a rod-like support structure. Notochord, so you can only think of it as a spinal cord, because a spinal cord is a kind of notochord. But if it helps you remember, because of the cord, a notochord is a rod-like support structure that runs along the back of the animal, that separates the nervous tissue from the gut. So the nervous tissue and the gut is the stomach area. The notochord divides these 2 areas, and it provides support to the organism. Alright, so Protochordata and the rest of the animals that follow this phylum have a notochord. Alright, so it provides a place for muscles to attach for ease of movement. So by now all these animals have begun moving a lot, alright? They have to move a lot, so they need to have ease in moving, and that is how a notochord helps. Protochordates do not have a proper notochord present at all stages in their lives, alright? So they don't have a spinal cord from their birth to their death, and they are marine animals, alright? So some examples would be Herdmania and Balanoglossus, alright? Those are some examples of protochordates. And then we have the vertebrata, that's the 10th phylum of the animal kingdom. These animals have a true vertebral column, alright, and they have an internal skeleton. So we have skeleton, and our muscles, blood, and the skin, they all cover the skeleton. So the skeleton is the inner, so the bones form our inner skeleton, alright, and they allow completely different distribution of muscle attachment points that are used for movement. So all vertebrates move a lot. We move a lot, right? We move, we walk, we run, we move about even when we're sleeping. So to allow all that movement, we need to have properly attached muscles, and that is achieved through a proper notochord or a proper vertebral column, alright? Even vertebrates are bilaterally symmetrical, they are triploblastic, they are coelomic, and they are segmented, alright? The left and right sides of their body have the same design. They have 3 layers of cells, they have a true body cavity, and they are segmented. We have a head, thorax, we have an abdomen. We're not just one rectangular organism, alright? We have different divisions, like so, right? And so we are segmented, alright, with complex differentiation of body tissues and organs. And all chordates possess the following features. We have a notochord, we have a dorsal nerve cord, we are triploblastic, we have paired gill pouches, and gill pouches can mean the gills that are seen in fish, they can mean the lungs that are seen in animals, and we are all coelomate. We all have true body cavities, alright. So the first one, the first subdivision of vertebrata. So Animalia was the kingdom, vertebrata is the phylum. So Cyclostomata would be the class, alright, because it's kingdom, phylum, class. So the first class is cyclostomes, and they are jawless vertebrates. They don't have a well-defined, they don't have a jaw at all, alright. They have an elongated eel-like body, They have a circular mouth. They have slimy skin, and they are scaleless. They don't have scales, alright. They are ectoparasites or borers of other vertebrates. So they are also a type of parasites, alright. Lamprey, hagfish, they are all examples of cyclostomata. Then we have Pisces. They are the fish, alright. That's the second class. They are exclusively aquatic animals. They cannot live on land. When you take a fish out of water, it will struggle for breath, and it will die eventually. They cannot survive outside of water, so they're exclusively aquatic animals. Their skin is covered with scales, or they're covered with plates, and they obtain oxygen dissolved in water by using their gills, alright. The body is streamlined. They have this typical streamlined shape, alright, and a muscular tail is used for movement, right. They're cold-blooded, and their hearts have only 2 chambers. So if this is their heart, they have only 2 chambers. Humans have 4, but fish have only 2, alright. They lay eggs, and we can think of many kinds of fish. We have goldfish, we have not starfish, we have goldfish, we have tuna fish, and we have many other fish like sharks. They're also fish, alright. We can think of many kinds of fish. Some have skeletons made entirely of cartilage. So cartilage was the soft bone that I was talking to you about in the previous lesson. You touch the tip of your nose, you will feel the cartilage. Some fish have the skeleton made up entirely of cartilage, that soft bone, alright. Like sharks have just cartilage in their skeleton, and some have a skeleton made of both bone and cartilage, like tuna fish or rohu. Okay, so there are many examples for fish: the electric fish, the dogfish, catfish, all of that. So this is the mandarin fish, anglerfish, lionfish, electric ray, stingray, alright, dogfish. Right, they're all examples of fish. And then more examples of fish like rohu, seahorse, a flying fish, climbing perch. They're all examples of fish. Alright. And then we have amphibia. That's the third class of the phylum Vertebrata, which is the 10th phylum of the kingdom Animalia. Alright. These animals differ from the fish in their lack of scales, so they don't have scales again, and they have mucus glands in their skin and then they have a 3-chambered heart. Fish had 2-chambered hearts. Amphibia have 3-chambered hearts. Respiration is either through gills or through lungs, because amphibia, they survive in water and on land. So in water they use gills, out of water and on land they use their lungs. They lay eggs, and these animals are found both in water and on land. Frogs, toads, salamanders are some examples of amphibia. Alright, and then we have the 4th class of the phylum Chordata, Vertebrata, so reptilia, those are the reptiles. These animals are cold-blooded, they have scales, and they breathe through their lungs. Alright, so they live completely on land, so they have lungs through which they breathe. Well, most of them have 3-chambered heart. Crocodiles are the only reptiles that have 4-chambered hearts, as similar to those of mammals. Alright, and they lay eggs with tough coverings, and they don't need to lay their eggs in water. Alright, amphibians lay their eggs in water. They live the primary stages of their life in water and they move on to land. But reptiles live on land from the beginning. Alright, snakes, turtles, lizards, and crocodiles all fall in this category of reptiles. Alright, so the flying lizard, the house wall lizard, they're all examples of reptiles. And then we have aves. They're warm-blooded and they have a 4-chambered heart. Alright, so from aves onwards we have 4-chambered hearts. But aves also lay eggs. So aves are the birds. Okay, aves are all birds. They lay eggs. Birds lay eggs. And there is an outside covering of feathers, and 2 forelimbs are modified for flight. So 2 are their legs, and 2, instead of hands, they have wings with which they fly. And they breathe through the lungs, and all birds fall in this category. Alright, so eagles, vultures, sparrows, kites, they're all birds. Alright, pigeons, crows, ducks, storks, flamingos, they're all birds. Then we have the 6th class, which is Mammalia. Mammals or Mammalia, they're warm-blooded animals with 4-chambered hearts. Alright, they have mammary glands for the production of milk to nourish their young. That's what, so mammary glands is a characteristic feature of only mammals. That's where they that's how their name is derived. Alright, mammary glands only for mammals. Their skin has hairs as well as sweat and oil glands. Alright, so from Mammalia we're seeing a lot of body design differentiation. We have skin, we have sweat glands, we have oil glands, we have mammary glands, we have hair. So most mammals, familiar to us, produce live young ones. Alright, so most mammals don't lay eggs in which the young organism is forming, right? Most mammals give birth to live young ones, and few of them, like the platypus and echina, lay eggs. Some organisms like kangaroos, they give birth to very poorly developed young ones. Alright, so kangaroos, once they're born, they're very weak and when they're young. Alright, and as they grow, they gain their strength to become more developed kangaroos. Alright, and some examples are shown here. So humans, cats, dogs, bats, rats, whales, they're all mammals. Alright? So whales are also mammals, contrary to many people thinking they're fish, but sharks are fish, whales are mammals. Whale is one of the very few mammals that lives in water. Alright? So we have 4 questions here that I expect you to answer on your own. And here we have Carlos Linnaeus, who was an important person in the classification of organisms, in that he put forward the nomenclature of organisms that we will talk about very soon. So this is the flowchart for animals. It's pretty large, so I can't cover it in the whole page. I think I can. Yeah, alright. So animals, if they have a tissue level of organization, at least a tissue level of organization, they're further subdivided. If not, if they're only up to cells, it's porifera. If they have a true body cavity, if they have a body cavity, they're subdivided. If not, they're divided into Coelenterata, platyhelminthes, and nematodes. Alright. If they have a coelom of pouches that are pinched off from the endoderm, so triploblastic consists of the 3 cellular layers that I was talking to you about. It's endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. Alright, those are the 3 layers of cells that I kept saying triploblastic. Those are the 3 layers. Alright, if they have these 3 layers, they're subdivided. If not, they're divided. They stop at Annelida, mollusca, and arthropoda. Alright, if they have a notochord, they're subdivided. If not, they're Echinodermata. If they have a vertebral column in adults, they're subdivided. If not, they're called Protochordata. And so if they have a vertebral column, they're called Vertebrata. And they are subdivided into Cyclostomata, Pisces, Amphibia, Reptilia, Aves, and Mammalia. Alright, so that is the whole animal kingdom. Alright, so then we have nomenclature. That will be our last topic for this lesson. Nomenclature is the naming of organisms. Alright, this is very important. Alright, let me zoom in. So there is a system for naming living organisms, and that is called nomenclature. It would be difficult for people speaking or writing in different languages to know when they're talking about the same organism. Alright, so a tiger can be called various different things in various different languages. So is it with with a peacock, an ant, neem tree, lotus, potato that they gave here, right? I'm just reading off these examples, but it's going to be very difficult for people all over the world to talk about the same organism but use different words for it. That's why we have a scientific system of naming them. Irrespective of what language you speak, you call an organism by its scientific name, the others will be able to recognize it, provided that they know that the scientific name for that organism is what they said. Alright, if you don't know any scientific name, nobody expects you to know what they're talking about, but if you know scientific names of organisms, you can talk to a person from any part of the world who also knows scientific name for an organism, and you both will be able to know that you're talking about the same organism. Alright, so there are rules for naming them. The first rule is that the name of the genus should begin with a capital letter. So I am going to take an example of human beings. We're called Homo sapiens, right? So this is the name of the genus and this is the species name. Alright, let me use different colors for it so you can identify easily. Homo. Want it to be neater. Homo. And then sapiens. That's what we're called. Homo sapiens. So the Homo is the genus name, and genus, and sapiens would be the species name. Alright, and this is for humans. Alright, so the name of the genus must begin with a capital letter. So if you notice here, I started Homo with a capital H, because the name of the genus should start with a capital letter. The name of the species must begin with a small letter. So you might think, okay, you started with the capital letter, why didn't you start the name of the species with this capital letter? Because the name of the species should be in lower case letters. Alright, alright, it's very typical. Alright, so the name of the genus must start with a capital letter. The name of a species must start with a small letter. And when printed, the scientific name should be given in italics. Alright, if you see a scientific name in the textbook, they usually have it in italic printing. Alright, but if written by hand, the genus name and the species name have to be underlined separately. Alright, first of all they have to be underlined, and second of all they should be underlined separately. You cannot do this. Alright, that is wrong. They have to be underlined separately. So I have one underline for under Homo and one for sapiens. That is the correct way to write the scientific name. So the correct name way would be Homo sapiens, and I underline each of them individually. This would be the best way, this will be the right way to write the scientific name of a human. Alright, have to be underlined separately. Alright, so with that we finish this lesson. Yes, and these are the recap points that you can go over on the day of your exam or the night before your exam. And there are very few questions. There are only 6 questions, so it's going to be easy for you if you're confident about the lesson. This will be very easy. Alright, so now it's time for points to recap. Alright, so if this ever wants to move, I will start. Move too much. Okay, points to recap. First we started the lesson with introduction, and then we talked about the basis of classification, how we ask different questions at each stage to differentiate between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, unicellular versus multicellular, plants versus animals, all of that. Alright, and then we learned about classification and evolution, and I gave the example of complex thinking skills versus basic thinking skills in while humans evolved from apes, right? And then we have the hierarchy of classification. So it's divided into kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So if you realized, I just wrote it like that. I remember it. You are supposed to practice these 7 steps of classification until you are so familiar that you can just write it while you're talking, or while someone is talking to you. You should automatically be able to write it. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Alright, and these are the 5 kingdoms: Monera, Protista, fungi, Plantain, Animalia. And then we learned about the different phyla of Plantain: Thalophyta, Bryophyta, Pteridophyta, Gymnosperms, Angiosperms. Thalophyta does not have a well-differentiated body. Bryophyta has a well-differentiated body, but it does not have specialized tissue for conduction. Pteridophyta has a well-differentiated body and a specialized tissue for conduction of water, but it does not have, but it has hidden reproductive organs or cryptogams. Gymnosperms and angiosperms have visible reproductive organs. Gymnosperms have naked seeds. Angiosperms have seeds that are enclosed within fruits, alright, or flowers. And then we talked about Animalia, in which these are the 10 phyla: Porifera, Cnidaria or Coelenterata, Platyhelminthes, Nematoda, Annelida, Arthropoda, Mollusca, Echinodermata, Protochordata, and Vertebrata. And then we talked about the 6 classes of vertebrata, alright, Cyclostomata, Pisces, Amphibia, Reptilia, Aves, and Mammalia. We talked about that, and then we talked about nomenclature, the rules for writing the scientific names of organisms. Alright. Then we talked about nomenclature, and then we talked about exercises. We just went through the exercises page. There were only 6 exercises. I have confidence in you. You can do these exercises by yourself, and that is how we finished this lesson. This is a very important lesson. I hope you had fun, and I also hope that this video helped you understand this concept better. Alright, so head on to the next video that will cover physics chapter. Alright, we are taking a small break from biology. We'll come back and talk about how we fall in and out of that later, but the next chapter will be a physics chapter. And don't forget that you can do this. Yeah, so have a great day. Do not forget to like and share this video, subscribe to our channel for more content, and rock your exam. All the very best. Bye bye.